introductions. Are there any? Seeing none. All right, thank you. Today we continue our 101, and today we're going to hear from Secretary Howard again. And this time she's going to be talking about a quick overview on DCF. So, Secretary, welcome once again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad to be back in front of the committee wearing a different hat today. My hat as Secretary of DCF. So glad to be here for this overview. Try to keep this as overview as possible. I know you'll get into a lot more detail as you get into the budget conversations. So DCF, the Department for Children and Families. Our mission as an agency is to protect children, to strengthen families, and to promote adult self-sufficiency. And just on that second page of the handout, you can kind of see some of the values that we follow in doing our work. I included an organizational chart because I think it sounds helpful just to see who some of the key people are who are in leadership roles for the agency, and I have a couple of those folks with me here today. So within DCF, we function with 2 deputy secretaries, one over programs or family services, one over operations, and I'd like to just introduce them briefly. First, we have Tanya Keys over here on the left. Tanya is our Deputy Secretary over all of our program areas. And then Dan Levine is our Deputy Secretary of Operations. So finance, procurement, all those good things on the operations side. Also here with me today, I have Andrea Warnke, who is our legislative liaison, governmental affairs manager. So anything you need, you'll see her around the building just like you'll see Lee Keck on the KDAD side. So reach out to them if you need to get a hold of me or there's anything that you need from our agency, and we'll be happy to respond. But again, kind of 2 primary large divisions, the program side and the operation side. We also have our general counsel, and then you can just see how the various pieces are organized under that. On page 4, I just wanted to give you a picture of where DCF is located across the state. We're a service agency that does a lot of work in communities across the state. So we're separated into regions that are the different colors on this chart. So we have 6 regions that we're separated into, and then we have 36 service centers. And those are, that little star, the little asterisk tells you where there's actually a DCF office. A DCF office is where someone can come in and apply for benefits. That's where our investigators will be who go out to investigate child abuse and the like. And it's kind of an interesting kind of factoid that until the late 1990s, Kansas law required that there be an office in each of the 105 counties. That was back when it was an umbrella agency that was then called the Department for Social and Rehabilitation Services, and at that point there was an SRS office in every county. Over different gyrations over time, those numbers have been reduced either administratively or through legislative processes down to the 36 service centers or offices that we have today. In terms of organization on page 5, you can see kind of the circle chart, just really high level. All of our programs are supported by our core administration and operations, but we have 4 key program areas that I'll spend some time talking with you about today. At the very top, you'll see economic and employment services, our key benefit programs, prevention and protection services, which is really child and family well-being, the child welfare system, child support services, really involved with establishing and enforcement of child support orders and collection of child support, and rehabilitation services related to voc rehab and disability determination for people with disabilities. So 4 main program areas, and again, with most of our staff really being located in those 36 service centers across the state. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time today just talking about each of these four main areas. I could spend a whole presentation on each one, but we'll just keep it high level so you get a good sense of just the scope of the work that DCF does. I'll start with prevention and protection services. That's probably what people think about first when they think about DCF. This is the area of our agency that works in the areas of prevention, in the areas of permanency related to foster care, and then has a lot of activities related to program implementation and quality assurance around that. So we have three primary directors who work in this area. But prevention and protection services helps families and vulnerable adults by providing first protection services. We're the agency where people can make a call or make contacts in different ways to what we call our protection report centers. You might think about kind of the concept of a child abuse hotline. People can report child abuse, they can report adult abuse, and we investigate those reports. There's a variety of things that happen after that takes place, but that's activity and work that's done by our staff, by state staff on the protection side. We also manage a number of preventative services that I'll talk about a little bit further in this presentation as well, including the most recent addition to our prevention services, which are the Family First programs, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in just a minute. If we move away maybe from the front end and really supporting children and families without a child needing to come into custody, this is the part of our agency that also supports the foster care program. And in Kansas, we manage our foster care program through a partnership with private partners, what we call our case management providers, who provide much of the case management work after a child comes into custody. And then, of course, depending upon the child's case plan, if they're not returning home, we also manage a number of services related to adoption and independent living for older youth. We also have a licensing function, just like you would have heard from KDHE, and within this part of our agency, there's licensing of foster and group homes that takes place as well. When I've got a couple slides to share just related to prevention and protection services. The first on slide 7 just kind of talks about the backdrop of how we do our work through what we call the Kansas practice model. We've worked really hard to put some tools and structures into place to get consistent decision making, to give our caseworkers tools, and to ensure that families are at the table in decision making. So there's a number of tools that we use, including a process called team decision making, a process called signs of safety. And as a result of this work, we've really seen a significant drop in the need for foster care in this state. We currently have just over 6,200 youth in care. That's down from 7,600 4 years ago. And you can see another maybe picture of that on page 8, where you can see the blue bars on the chart show children entering foster care each year since state fiscal year 2018. The yellow shows exits, and you can see that for each of the last 3 years, we've had more children exiting care than entering care. So, and again, partly the team decision making, partly some of the prevention work that I'll talk about in just a moment. I mentioned adoptions for those youth who cannot return to their family and whose parental rights end up becoming severed. Adoptions increased beginning in state fiscal year 2019. They've now been averaging just over 1,000 annually the last 4 years. And the chart on page 9, that bar graph, shows that for those youth who are adopted, about half are adopted by a foster parent, and about half are adopted by a relative. 3% are adopted by someone else. So again, about half I mean, so almost, 97% of the youth adopted by someone with whom they have some type of a relationship. The average age at the time of the finalized adoption is 7 years old. 2/3 of the adopted children are 8 years or younger. I wanted to spend just a minute and talk about the Family First Prevention Services Act. You'll hear a little bit more about this at budget time because there is a recommendation in the governor's budget to expand this program. But this is a program that this legislature endorsed 4 years ago after Congress passed a new law that would allow states to claim federal funds for prevention services related to child welfare. Before this time, really almost all of the federal child care matching funds came down only for youth after they came into our custody. So the Federal Family First Prevention Services Act was really predicated on, being able to divert youth at risk of going into foster care from entering the system by providing evidence-based services to those youth and their families in 4 areas of service: mental health, parent skill building, kinship navigation that has to do with some legal supports, and in the area of substance use disorder. We were an early adopter state. We jumped in as one of the first 3 or 4 states to do this. And again, largely due to the support from all of you and the governor in funding the state match for the program and in making some statutory changes that we needed at that time. We're excited that when we measure the program's success, and there's robust evaluation that has to come with this program under the federal act. We have a contract with the KU School of Social Welfare and the KU Center for Public Partnerships to do that evaluation. And for kids who were referred to this program, the percentage of children still remaining at home 12 months after referral is at 89%. Our goal is 90%, so really quite well. And remember, this isn't like an early prevention program. These children needed to be at imminent risk of coming into the foster care system when we made this referral, and 89% of them have been able to stay at home safely. So again, I'm really pleased with this program, and we are actually right in the process right now of rebidding. This is a program we manage through grants to a number of community partners across the state. Those first round of grants, those timeframes have ended, and we'll be announcing those next grants probably in early February. One more piece I wanted to mention on the prevention and protection services side before I move on to our second program area is on the foster care side. I was just talking about, being ready to announce new grants on Family First. We will just be starting the process of rebidding our foster care case management grants. These are the entities that support the youth who are in our system that provide the case management for those youth. We have 4 entities who do that today: St. Francis Ministry, KVC, TFI, and Cornerstones of Care. We are starting the process of rebidding. So we're beginning listening sessions for feedback on those grants. We look to release new RFPs May or this summer, make awards by December or January, with then the new grants kicking in July 1 of 2024. So again, we'll be starting that process for rebidding on the foster care case management providers. That'll be a big level of work across our agency to really get the kind of input we need and to really take in a lot of the feedback that we've learned over the last few years with regard to those. So that's prevention and protection services. The second program area is child support services.
If you hold just for a second, sure. Representative Ballard has a question.
I'm sorry, I didn't know if you wanted to wait through that or ask a question.
That's up to you, Representative.
I have a question that a constituent has asked me, and when you talked about Family First Prevention and how proud we are of that program and how many children have stayed in their homes. Does it matter what the presenting problem is, if it was abuse or with parents, or if it's the children acting up or they have a disability. When you say that, when they stay in the home, what have you really done to make sure that they're still safe in that setting?
Well, the awards that we make for this program, they're targeted around the needs that families have. So, for example, some of those are around parent skill building. So we might be referring families to evidence-based services that have to do with some of the home visiting and parent education for parents of young children. So that may be the issue. When you talk about maybe problem behaviors, there might be older youth acting out some dangerous behaviors there, they might be referred to one of our evidence-based mental health programs like family functional therapy. So it's targeted really to what the presenting factor is from the family, and that's why we have an array of different programs across the state. I don't think I have the map here, but you'll probably see it on our budget when we present there, that kind of shows what programs we have in each county, which types of programs. But again, Representative, it's kind of targeted to each youth. Each of these categories of services has done well. A couple of the areas have had 100% success, and we probably had the slightly less success on the substance use side, but we've also had fewer programs in this first round of grants.
So I'm assuming, and I shouldn't say that because then you don't know, but you have had outcomes that you have looked at that they have met before you allow them in the setting. Because I know if we want like family preservation, or like in this case, family first, we want to keep them in the family, but in some instances, that can't work because the setting is too difficult for whatever reason. So the outcomes you have, they have to meet certain outcomes before you say, okay, they're okay to stay where they are.
Yeah, there are assessments that are done to see whether the child can be safe where they are. And part of even like the team decision-making process I talked about talks about, what can we do to ensure the safety for this child? Can we ensure safety without the child being removed from their home? So there's a whole assessment process at the front that looks at those issues and also looks at, what might be the right fit for that family in terms of one of these evidence-based services. Yeah, and you're right, there is at the back end, it's a very robust evaluation process where our contractor is looking not just in the aggregate, but at every single one of our grantees, what their outcomes are for the service they're providing and the locations they're providing it. So we have very robust evidence base, especially as we move into maybe the second round of these grants. So
appreciate your explanation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and thank you for taking a sidebar here. Representative Hobson has a quick question, and we'll move back to your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation so far. Sticking on slide number 11, when you talk about the grants, you did say that there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into it by chance. How many applications do you receive, or does the agency receive per year in regards to before the deadline? I mean, how many applications roughly do you guys receive?
Well, there's a set time frame during which bidders can submit bids, and I think you're on the foster care grantee slide. On slide 11, we would expect a fairly limited number of bids in that area, just in the sense that there aren't that many entities that would be case management providers. On the Family First side, we could receive, 60 to 80 grants. Let me ask my deputy secretary if I might, how many grants we received in this last round? How many proposals? Do you recall?
I think around 35.
Yeah, around 35. That's Tanya Keyes, deputy secretary. We received about 35 submissions on the Family First.
And going back to slide, if I can, slide number 9, when you talked about the adoptions, are all the adoptions in-state, or do you have any out-of-state adoptions, or is it, how does that, if you can elaborate a little bit more on that?
I don't have the data right in front of me, Representative, but the vast majority of the adoptions are in-state. Where you would see an out-of-state adoption would be primarily if you had a relative of that child who wanted to take that child. So we're not reaching out across the country necessarily for adoptive parents. And as you can see, half of them were foster parents that they were placed with in Kansas. So you'd really see any out-of-state pieces primarily related to relatives.
And the reason why I bring up that question is just in case, well, just a scenario, say for instance, could be a family living in Wyandotte County but lives across the border in Missouri, I have property in Missouri and just over across the border. That's what I was asking.
Yeah, and we certainly do have some of that. I mean, there are special processes that have to happen when you have some things that happen across state lines. But we have some special agreements with the state of Missouri related to that metro area. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We do have a question from Representative Carpenter, if you'll bear with us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Back to slide 7, the decline in foster care. And of course, it's bottoming out in 2022. And could you elaborate on why it is?
Yeah, I would attribute the reduction to a couple of things. I'm sorry.
Reduction. I'm talking about why it's bottomed out at 2% in 22.
I don't know the answer to that. I think we're continuing to assess, because as we look at the fiscal year that we're in today, our number of youth in foster care are continuing to go down. So, so again, although the percent fewer in 22 from 21, it was less of a drop, obviously, than the prior years. But you'll continue to see, and in the caseload presentation, I know that Dylan did recently, continuing to show and project a continued decline throughout the fiscal year.
Okay, well, what we found last year was that those children were harder to place, and that's why this committee stepped up and put some money into some folks that were foster care parents that were taking the harder to place. And that's kind of what I was driving at. I can't remember the name of that. They were out of Emporia.
Yeah, you funded a group called CALM that does some special work related to particularly youth with IDD. And you're right, Representative Carpenter, I think, brings up a very good point that a lot of our focus right now is really on those youth who are the hardest to place and who maybe have the least stability within the foster care system. So a lot of focus on issues around high mental health needs, behavioral needs, some of our IDD youth. For example, we began a therapeutic foster care program in July, and that's slowly growing. I think we have 14 therapeutic foster homes today to provide kind of a higher level of support in a family setting. But again, very, very high priority is around some of those hardest to place and hardest to serve youth.
I just wanted to give the committee an idea of what we had done last year. Slide 12, I think it is. I got to get some new glasses. Slide 12. Child support services. How much are we owed now in back child support?
I don't know the answer to that question standing today, but we can get that for you, Representative.
Last I checked, it was over $800 million.
There's always a large amount. I mean, in every state, there's a large amount of back child support. I think there's a lot. That's why we look at so many different measures, right? What percentage of current support collections are happening? How much is one improving collections on back support? A lot of different measures, but I can give you that. We can get you that percentage as well as the trend there.
And so on that, last year, I know we tracked it because of COVID money, and folks have it whenever you have a claim against the state and you're getting a COVID check. We got a big bump in it because their money was taken by the state for their child support. So we did have a pretty good drop last year.
We did have a large bump. That's right, Representative Carpenter, in some kind of one-time collections that were taken from some tax breaks that people got. That's right. That's right.
And you might elaborate a little bit on slide 13. We changed vendors on child support vendors, and how is that going with changing vendors last year?
Yeah, if I might, Mr. Chairman, I think that's actually where I left off on the presentation. So if
Committee, let's hold
you'd like me
questions
to,
till the end, and then
Yep.
you remember where you were, so you can pick up then. Thank you very much for
Yeah.
that.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman. I knew that when I asked that question, that it was going to open it up and you were going to be stopped. So
all right, so the second of 4 programs, child support services, that Representative Carpenter was just speaking about. Child support's just what everyone knows that it is. I mean, it's helping children get the financial support necessary, typically from an absent parent. So child support program assists in that by everything from establishing parentage, paternity establishment, parentage establishment, getting orders established for child support, location of non-custodial parents, enforcing child support orders, and modifying support orders as needed. We work with private contractors to do this. In the fall of 2021, we moved to 2 full-service contractors for child support in Kansas. Those are Maximus and Young Williams. As part of that process, we also used to have a separate client contact center. That actually ended up being pretty confusing to clients who were trying to call for help. And so we built that into each of the contractors' contracts. So I think that piece is going well. The contractors are on board. And I think honestly, Representative, they're in some of the growing pains period of beginning to be a new contractor in some new areas. So we have some success stories. We just have some areas where we're working with them in terms of improvement. And I'd be happy to share more of those details with you. But again, nothing that we wouldn't probably have anticipated, but bringing some new tools, bringing some good ideas to the system, but a few growing pains in some areas as well. Third program area of the 4, economic and employment services. That's led in our agency by Sandra Kimmons. This is the part of DCF that provides a variety of benefit programs for individuals. That includes cash assistance, which is the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, food assistance, otherwise known as the SNAP program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance, child care assistance, employment assistance for people who are on those benefit programs. We also run the Low-Income Energy Assistance Program, which provides some winter energy assistance. And then there's a brand new program that the federal government passed recently that is an emergency water assistance program. So kind of like the low-income heating program, but it's providing assistance with water bills that we're managing. And so these programs all have a variety of different requirements. Some of those are federal, some of those are within Kansas state law. Those requirements define who's eligible in terms of income level, how long people can receive services, whether or not they need to work or be seeking work while they're on those services. So again, temporary assistance for needy families is really the smallest program today from the cash assistance side. And we've got some numbers a little bit later on in this testimony, but today we have we have under 2,000 adults on TANF, about 5,400 children. Kansas is a state that has imposed a 24-month lifetime time limit to receive TANF benefits under the HOPE Act that was passed a few years ago. The federal time limit is 5 years. So again, pretty small number of families, very low income, tend to be on those benefits for really a very short period of time. Food assistance would be the largest program, the SNAP program. And again, within that program, there are certain work requirements for certain able-bodied individuals, and there are options related to employment services for some other individuals. And again, I'll show you some of those numbers in just a minute. We also receive federal funding through the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act to the Child Care and Development Fund to provide child care assistance or child care subsidies to low-income families. That tends to have a higher income level, can in some cases go up to 250% of the federal poverty level for some level of benefit. And again, these are child care subsidies to assist lower income families with having the child care assistance they need to be able to work. So these are working families. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, the seasonal energy assistance program called LEAP, Low Income Energy Assistance Program, and the new Emergency Water Assistance Program. You know, we don't talk very much about the work programs that we have as an agency, but within the context of these employment programs, we do an awful lot with our beneficiaries with regard to engagement in work programs, work preparation, and engagement in programs towards employment, towards self-sufficiency. Our TANF cash assistance adults, there are a few exceptions for people, disability, things like that, where they don't have to engage in a work program, but most of our cash assistance adults have to participate 20 to 30 hours per week to receive the cash assistance. Just as an example, from the last fiscal year, from July 2021 to June 2022, there were more than 2,800 new employments through that process for those individuals. We also have a couple of programs on the food assistance side related to our food assistance clients. One of those is mandatory for able-bodied adults who are on food assistance who don't have dependents. So those able-bodied adults without dependents have to work to meet employment goals to continue to receive SNAP. And then you put some new requirements in this past year that we'll visit with you more about in a couple of slides. I'll skip the other couple of things on this slide because they actually relate to our fourth program area, and we also have some work programs within our VOC rehabilitation side of the shop. But just in terms of numbers on the benefit side, you have kind of a picture on page 16. The SNAP program, 110,000 adults, 87,000 children, so 200,000 Kansans receiving some level of food assistance benefits. Child care, about 12,000 children, and we also had a special program during the pandemic that we called the Hero Relief Program, where we were providing some child care assistance of some of our first responders, food service workers, healthcare workers. That served about 2,000 children per month. And then I already mentioned the TANF clients and those numbers. One of the things that we're busy with implementation on right now is some legislation you passed at the very, very end of the last session, I think within the last couple of days. House Bill 2448, that created some additional work requirements for able-bodied adults on food assistance that increased the requirement that any able-bodied adult without dependence on food assistance age 18 to 49 who wasn't already employed at least 30 hours a week has to participate in SNAP employment and training as a condition of receiving food assistance. And we had to go through a lot of processes with our federal partners to get approval, but we got that approval and the program went live on October 1st. We're using 15 of our staff called career navigators for implementation and are collaborating with 5 different community organizations on that program. So again, that's up and running and is in the process of being implemented. So again, food assistance. I always think it's important to kind of think about the different populations that receive that food assistance because about 30% of people in the state who receive food assistance are elderly and disabled who are low income. So that's kind of one category. Then you have a lot of working families, low-income working families with children who by their income qualify. And then the category we talk a lot about with regard to work requirements are then that sliver of able-bodied adults, which again, probably about 25% of the total food assistance population. I might say all these benefit programs, I didn't really say at the beginning how much intersection and interaction we have with our, I guess I'll call them our federal partners at the Department of Health and Human Services for most of our programs. But when you talk about food assistance, that's actually through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Food assistance really was established really as a combination of a nutrition support and an agricultural support program. So we follow a lot of guidelines from both of those agencies across these programs, have to submit a lot of different state plans. And I would say that this is a part of our agency that has been extremely busy during the pandemic. You'll see that when you see some of our budget slides. A lot of changes to those programs that happened in some of the federal relief laws. A lot of additional child care funds that came in during the pandemic. I mean, several $100 million of child care dollars. Changes to food benefits, temporary increases in the amount of food benefits, requirements to not remove people from service, similar to kind of your Medicaid conversation. So a lot of things. It felt like we were changing the rules every other week to our staff, I think, with how fast things were coming down from our federal partners. They did a great job adapting to those things, managing lots of changes and requirements and lots of new and temporary programs during that whole time period. But you'll see a little bit of that when you look at some of our trends in our budget. Just some of those dollars that have come in during that time period that you won't really see in the future years. So our last area of the 4 program areas, rehabilitation services, that's led by Dan Decker. I think about this as 2 parts. The first is vocational rehabilitation. That's really, and when I think about vocational rehabilitation, think about an individual who perhaps has an accident or an injury and becomes disabled. This is the program that helps them prepare and be ready to go back to work. And so a lot of vocational services. We also provide services for older Kansans who are blind or visually impaired. And you can see some of the outcomes there. Serving about 8,400 Kansans with disabilities, about 1,100 achieved competitive employment last year of that group. We also, on the behest of the Social Security Administration, are the entity in Kansas that processes disability determination claims. That's funded 100% from federal dollars, but we're the entity that processes those claims through what's called disability determination services. 18,254 claims last year, an accuracy rate of about 97%. I mean, I'm really proud. Really, over the years, Kansas has always been very well regarded in terms of how well we have managed that process and how accurate we've been in those disability determinations. So again, that's our 4th program. Sometimes I think receives the least attention, but does really, really significant work as it relates to individuals with disabilities. A couple more things, and I'll wrap up and take questions. I did want to mention one major initiative that's underway within the agency. This goes back a little bit to prevention and protection services, but it's our comprehensive child welfare information system. We've been talking to this committee and the legislature over the last few years about how aged our child welfare related IT systems are. How we have 5 legacy systems of various ages, some such that there's probably not anyone who even knows the programming language anymore. They're so obsolete. But we've been in planning stages for the last couple of years. This legislature has been very generous in providing those planning funds. And we've gone through all the federal approvals we have to go through for a comprehensive child welfare information system, which are pretty extensive. We've gone through some of the state CEDO and KETO processes, and we are getting ready to issue RFPs within the next month for the comprehensive child welfare information system. You will see when you do the budget a request from us for some of the implementation dollars. I think what the governor has asked us to do, you won't see that in her budget yet. She's asked asked us to sort of see what those bids look like and then perhaps come back with the GBA. We still have some money left from planning for the current fiscal year, about $12 million left over. But as we see what those bids look like, we'll probably either request a GBA or put something in the revised budget for next year. So again, major project. It will take a lot of effort and energy, but so much needed. And then also the ability for our private partners to enter information into the same system, to have things not in all of our various legacy systems plus their systems, but to have a comprehensive system. So again, excited about that. I can't even imagine the level of work that will be involved in implementing that. We're glad to be at that stage. The last couple of pages, I won't spend more than just 2 minutes on, just to give you that first glimmer of the DCF budget, just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the budget. For fiscal year 24, $833 million. You'll see that's actually a reduction. It was just over $1 billion for fiscal year 23. That's where you see kind of the impact of some of those pandemic dollars I talked about that were coming in that kind of made our budget quite a bit higher for a couple years there. And again, funding-wise, about almost 50% federal funds, about 47% state general fund, and a few random other funds. We get a little bit of CIF, some things like that. You can see in fiscal year 23, we had $169 million in pandemic dollars. We only show about $9 million in fiscal year 24. And again, just a glimpse on the next 2 pages. If you just think about the 4 programs I just talked to you about, if you look at page 22 and look at the top of that page, of that $832 million, about half of that is in our prevention and protection services area. The prevention services, the foster care services, the adoption services. And again, you can see how that goes down in the other areas. Kind of similarly, if you look at page 23, the state general fund dollars, if we were to break it down just by state general fund, you would see the significantly largest area is prevention and protection services, $260 million out of the $390 million. Federal funds, a little glimpse of federal funds on page 24. TANF is our largest federal funding source, a block grant that we receive each year. Out of $400 million in federal funds that show up in our budget, $92 million of that are TANF. The next most significant is in the child care area. I do want to mention, you'll see a really small number here for SNAP, the food assistance. Food assistance itself that goes out through the benefits card to beneficiaries is an off-budget item in the Kansas budget. It's 100% federally funded. But that would be, depending upon if you have the pandemic dollars or not, anywhere between $300 to $500 million in benefits that are going out that you won't see in the bottom line of our budget. If those showed up as on-budget items, that would increase our budget by $300 to $500 million. So again, just a little bit of an anomaly there because the other benefits show up there. So with that, I'll just close, Mr. Chairman, and answer any questions you might have.
Perfect. Thank you. Committee questions. Representative Barth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you again.
You too.
I know I asked several different questions on the Health and Human Services Committee that I'm on as well, and Representative Ballard asked an excellent question earlier that you brought up on the just returning, kids and such returning if it was really necessary and evaluating that. That is a huge high concern. Sometimes a goal, sometimes it's not always, hitting a number is not always the right thing. Always have to have the kids' interests at heart, and this is near and dear to my heart, and so it's an important topic. And Representative Carpenter brought up something about garnishments, or around the wage garnishments with the amounts of the money being collected, and there was like an $8 million, 800 million Can
It's a
you,
significant bump.
can
with
you tell
one
us
of the
where,
pandemic
why, what's
cases.
happening? Because that's, okay, I go to work for somebody, I fill out my paperwork, that creates, a process that goes to state, it's pretty quick. That garnishment then goes on the paycheck for a deduction, that money gets collected, and then that money gets appropriated to the people. So what is the 800 million? Is it the collection of it, and it's sitting there, or what? I'm sorry, I didn't
There can be,
understand.
yeah, that's a really great question, Representative Barth, and there's a lot of factors that can go into why there can be back payments in child support. In some instances, this would not be the vast reason, but one instance might be those circumstances where orders have been established, but that parent has not actually been located to enforce that order. A second piece, not every employer is required to do garnishment. As you talked about, if every single person, when they went to work, if there was garnishment of wages to collect child support, that number wouldn't look like that. So there are some gaps in where that's required. And if you ask me much deeper, I'm going to have to come back and give you the details on it because I got about as deep as I know right now. But there are a lot of factors like that, and that's why we've had different legislation over the years that has spoken to some of those pieces. But again, those would be two of the factors that would impact that.
I think we need to do some research on that law around the garnishment for employers, because I thought all of them were required to in Kansas. All right. Something that I asked about on the other committee too, and I wanted to come back to that because I thought about it after I had asked it. I know you're doing an RFP for the services for the entities that manage the social caseworker piece of it, that we have 4 current vendors. And one of the things I talked about within the RFP is because it's such a high caseload and there has been a higher level of dissatisfaction and having some performance measurement guarantees. You had said there would be performance measurements. There is a difference. I wanted to see if that was something you all were actually considering. Guarantee is kind of a in the contracts and such that I've worked with is are you satisfied? If not, then here's the process we go through. It's a little bit different, and then they have to go through that, and if they don't, then there is a penalty, there's a fine or something to that extent to really hold them accountable because it's such an important thing for those kids to be able to get the services they need.
And that's a very important question, Representative Barth. Just for context for the committee, in our current foster care case management contracts, or grants as we call them, we have provisions in there. There's a number of outcome measures that have to be met. Some of them are federal, some of them are things that we've imposed. And in our current ones, we have a process, if certain ones aren't being met, that corrective action plans need to be done, and there's monitoring of all of those pieces. And then ultimately, there's the opportunity for penalty or incentives. We enforced the first penalty provisions this year after a couple years of corrective action plans. The area you're talking about, that's an area we're looking close at as we look at I can't tell you today exactly what that will look like in the RFP, but we're looking closely at what accountability looks like in that, and what are the different ways in which we might do that. I have some familiarity with some things that are in some other state contracts, even in some of our other contracts. So we're looking very closely at the accountability piece, and I totally understand what you've expressed
I
today.
know that's a huge thing that's been discussed, so appreciate that greatly. Thank you.
Committee, other questions? Representative Droege.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Howard, for this presentation. I go back to slide 7, the exiting of the foster care. Could some of that be according to age? I was just curious. I'm not very familiar with this whole thing as they get older and just exit the foster care program.
Yeah, when youth come into foster care, several things can happen. Most youth are reintegrated with their families. Some youth are adopted. A few youth might go to custodianship, and then there's kind of what we call another planned living arrangement, which tends to be those youth who would age out of the system. And so there are some youth who do age out of the system. That's not that would be a very small portion of the children exiting. Again, most would exit through reintegration or adoption.
12, or locating non-custodial parents, I assume that's so you can have child support.
That's correct.
One last thing I would say is that in Alaska, if you go into a liquor store, you have to show your driver's license because that's the way they track people that aren't paying their child support.
Yeah, we do have some tools in Kansas. There's some things related, of course, to casinos and things like that. So there's different provisions that have passed over the years, but I think we're always open to some new ideas there in terms of collection, because when you think about really the best form of income support for a child is to receive that support from their own parents, so.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could we get that child support report
Yes,
to the committee?
yes.
That would be great.
You're talking about, I'm sorry, Representative, let me make sure what you're asking me. Are you asking for some of the more recent data, or are you asking for that evaluation report, the data we talked
No,
about? Okay.
The evaluation report's about this thick.
I know, it is.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that's not what you were asking
No,
for,
we
so.
don't want to do that. We don't want to kill a bunch of trees.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Committee, any other questions? Yes, Representative Ballard.
About the previous problem we had with, about the previous problem we have about space and not being able to place children before, and the histories, sometimes they were sleeping in the office and doing all of that. What have you done in terms so that that does not happen again? Because that's where all the bad publicity comes from, when that's why I don't get too close, because it starts bubbling. But what have DCF done in that area to make sure that we can place these kids, but yet not get the bad publicity as if we're just all shoving them in the office?
Sure. I mean, that's a really good question, Representative Ballard. We've spent a lot of time on issues around placement stability and placements for youth, and we've made significant progress with regard to youth not spending the night in offices, but we still have some work to do there. The numbers are nowhere near what they used to be. I think this month, as of a few days ago, I think we'd had 5 youth who, for various reasons, had spent the night at a case management provider's office. Now, doesn't mean they're sitting in a desk chair. I mean, they're on a couch or in a bed, that sort of thing. But what we see now is those tend to be youth who, they tend to be older youth. They tend to be youth who have some of those high needs that Representative Carpenter talked about. And recently, some of the things that we've done, I referenced the establishment of a new category of family foster care called therapeutic foster care that would provide more supports for youth with particularly mental health needs to be placed in a family setting. So growing that. We also have created what we've called kind of a placement stability network, and we've been working with our providers. 2 things. One, we added some funding to add recruiters to each of the child placement agencies to work on the issue of therapeutic foster care and other needs within their areas where they saw youth that might be hard to place, so to develop those homes. And then also sort of the placement network I was talking about, we created a process whereby some beds could be set aside. Kind of think about like the kind of bed holds you might have at a nursing home or a hospital, where we may have a few foster homes who are kind of keeping a bed hold to take that youth who needs that placement when there hasn't been a placement found. So our numbers have gone down dramatically, but they're not zero, and I'm not satisfied till they're zero in those offices. So.
Thank you, Mr. Truman. The reason I asked that question is because I knew about some of the changes, but also when you read it in the paper or you see it on TV, they present one part of it, but they never go back and get how that has been alleviated or changes you have made. And I think this committee should know the kinds of areas you have really strived to be better so that it doesn't happen. the way it was before. And I think it's just important to know that changes did occur, and those numbers are going down. And so I thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. Yeah, I mean, we've obviously done those really targeted changes, but just the fact of having fewer youth in the system makes a huge impact. I mean, the time period you were talking about, I mean, the system was pretty overwhelmed with more than 7,600 kids in the system, and I think really trying to just keep up with all the kids that there were. So the ability to have more prevention programs, just a variety of the efforts that we've done, I think have made a significant impact.
Thank you very much.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we were involved in some efforts to increase the ability to track foster care. What improvements have we made on that? I know we were looking at Benty and some others. Have we done anything on that?
So the comprehensive child welfare information system is really the larger technological effort. The other we have in place today that we implemented 4 years ago a placement matching system. So we know where every foster youth is. We know where every foster family is, what kinds of youth they might take, and we know the placement that every youth is in. So at any given time, the comprehensive child welfare information system will be far more robust and have a lot more functions and activities than that, Representative. But we do have that placement matching system and have for the last few years.
Well, one of the problems that we've had with these foster care is when they change these homes, the schools are so slow to get their records to the next school that they go to, and they may be in a foster care situation for only a month at a time. Well, by the time they're in a different home, the school finally sends the information to the school that they're in, and so the school that they're in has no idea what classes they have been involved in or what they should put them in, and so it just creates some difficulty. Has any improvement been made on that?
There has been, Mr. Carpenter. There's been a lot of improvement on the education side, and then just the larger context of kids not moving around as much reduces that issue. You know, I didn't mention one of our areas of focus has been on relative placements, and we've increased the proportion of youth who are placed with relatives from about 30% up to the high 40s, and that makes a huge difference in and of itself in terms of stability for those youth. So again, yes, there has been progress on the education side. I hope that's the sort of thing you'll hear in your own communities. We've certainly gotten that feedback through some expectations we built into with our providers. And like I said, just the broader context of working on that placement stability addresses a lot of those problems.
Very good. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, anything else? Seeing none, actually, I might have one just quick series of questions. I was kind of curious about the service centers. Did you say there were 36 remaining? Mm-hmm. And just looking at the map, it looks like they're kind of strategically placed, and I'm wondering if that's by population or ease of access or maybe the greatest need or a combination thereof.
You know, really a combination. And at the points in time, gosh, I've been around in different roles long enough to sort of remember the points where those were reduced down. You know, I mean, initially there were kind of assessments made, like of the number of benefit cases in an office. You know, looking at issues of poverty, some real calculations to propose, you know, which offices to discontinue, but also looking at kind of ease of access. I mean, where the location was compared to highways. Some of the decisions, frankly, were political decisions as well, and there were processes in the legislative process that ended up kind of participating in the determination of which offices stayed open. But for example, you'll see, you know, a larger constellation in southeast Kansas where you see more concentrated offices in a smaller geographic area. That speaks to your point, Representative, about need. Yeah.
And is there any movement toward further consolidation, or is it about as thin as it can get?
You know, we're really not having that conversation at this point. No active conversation on that.
Well, I want to thank you for coming back multiple times.
think I'll see you tomorrow.
You will? I think we have
will.
one more question. Representative Ballard.
I want to follow up on his question. Okay, you say you've been around a while. All right, so we go from having an office in all 105 counties to now 36. Is the delivery of service better? Or in choosing those 36, there's some counties that have to go such a distance in order to get service that they cannot get their needs met?
Those were the kinds of questions with the consolidation of offices, but one of the things I would say that has changed a lot over the years is the different ways in which people can access services from us. You don't always have to come to an office. I mean, we have an online application. We use kind of that Amazon Connect kind of phone system. People can call in, we can do interviews over the phone. So there's a lot of technology benefits that I think my answer to you would have been different 10 years ago than it is today, because we have a lot of mechanisms by which people can access services from us, particularly on the benefit side. And of course, we're responsible as it relates to like investigations and things. We make sure that we're covering in all those counties. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Madam Secretary, we're very grateful that you would make multiple trips here and bring your staff and introduce them to us. Committee, tomorrow we have more 101. That's probably our final 101, and we'll be talking about waivers. Monday, we don't have anything scheduled as of this point. We do have a program for Tuesday, and I think it'll be interesting. And then we're going to start looking at budgets on Wednesday, February 1st. So with that, we'll be adjourned.